Hi everybody, thank you so much for joining me today where I will be discussing best practices for designing user interfaces and experiences in video games development. For today's talk, I'll be covering four main points. The first one is who are you and I, the design process, tips and tricks, and my favorite, friendship is magic. But first, a little bit about me. Hi, I am Anissa Sanusi, and I am currently a senior UI designer at Roll7, and UI design is my passion. I have worked in the industry for about 9 years now, and I've worked on roughly 15 titles in that time, anywhere from just the pitching stage and all the way up until release and live ops, and even some cancelled titles. Rest in peace, buddies. Being around for this long, I've been lucky enough to work on a bunch of different platforms, like the PS Vita and PC, and for a while, a lot of mobile games.
Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys.
But currently, I'm on a cross-platform original IP slated for next-gen consoles, which means I get to design for controllers again.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
The teams I've worked on have ranged from a small studio of 12 people, and I'm the only UI UX person, up to a company of, 500 people. And I'm in a team of several UI or UX specialists, including programmers. And within each job, there are varying degrees of expectations on what I'm supposed to do. I mean, biggest difference I'd say when you're working solo instead of in a team, if something's then it's your own fault and you can't blame nobody else, so just then fix it. So anyway, the funny thing about UX, it's both a philosophy and a craft. So in a way, anybody could do it, right? So everybody should do it, right? Who are you and I? Defining your role and responsibilities. Okay, I'm gonna get a little bit existential here. Like, it's difficult for me to talk about UIX because it's such a nebulous role. There's a lot of variables at play, like how big is your studio, how big is your team, what are you making, are the people involved full-time or contracted, are you part of the design team, are you part of the art team? Like, it's a lot, right? But see, bigger teams usually have the luxury of specialization. This is why AAA is so, detailed and specific in everything that they do, because you have a whole ass person doing just the one thing for like 3 years. Obviously, that thing's going to be very high quality, right? So due to the nature of smaller teams blurring the roles into one another, it's really important to establish clear responsibilities with the team early on, like from the start. Smaller teams definitely iterate faster, and the UI UX person will most likely be like overworked and spread really thin, supporting multiple features at different stages of its life cycle. I do have a tip for this, which is called assigning people as owners, stakeholders, and gatekeepers, but a little bit more on that later. Basically, you are not a unicorn, no matter how much you wish you are. A unicorn is someone who does it all. UI design, UX design, user research, game design, animation, code, blah, 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 blah. Like, no. That's a one-way ticket to Imposter Syndrome City in Burnout Paradise. You do not need that kind of pressure on you. Yes, you can wear multiple hats, but you're not meant to wear all of them. Have this conversation with your team really early. Let it be at the conception of your studio or at the point when you're interviewing for one, The worst experience I've had is always when me or my boss or my colleagues don't know what my job is, and our expectations are not aligned. That's where a lot of conflict comes from. So have some clarity from the get-go. Defining who you are is only half of the coin. The other half is defining your process. The design process, finding what suits you and your game. If you want better results, then forget about setting goals. Focus on your system instead. This is a really good quote from one of my favorite books called Atomic Habits. It's about building up habits that will stick with you for life. Results have very little to do with the goals that you set and nearly everything to do with the systems that you follow. Like, for example, if you're a coach, your goal might be to win a championship. So your system is the way you recruit players, manage your assistant coaches, and conduct your practice. And if you're a musician, your goal might be to play a new piece. So your system is how often you practice, how you break down and tackle difficult measures, and your method of receiving feedback from your instructor, right? But what if you're a game developer? Your goal might be to build a good game. Your system is how you test game ideas, iterate on them, and validate your ideas. Does that sound familiar? Because that's basically what UI and UX is. So why is it the way you work any different from the very thing that you're creating? I'm just getting comfortable here. We can sum up the design process like this. Defining core pillars, going down ideation and researching, designing, concepting, and prototyping. You test and iterate that, and if it's all okay, you implement it, and if that's all okay, test and iterate it again and again and again, and then finally, maybe you ship it. Maybe. Okay, this is really important to set out from the get-go. Decide on what your core pillars are of your game. You can have different core pillars for several situations, but in your case, as the person who is in between art and design, you want to be clear on what is a design pillar and what is an art and visual pillar. These values function as a high-level view of the game to spot issues across different features. You're going to be doing a lot of screens and doing a lot of different situations, but you want to make sure that each one of those is cohesive. For example, let's say your game has 3 pillars, which is light fantasy, humorous, and optimistic. So these are these are values. These aren't like strict things, like let's say, it has to be blue. I mean, that could be one of your style guides things where, your main theme is blue or whatever. But does the color blue, show optimism? Is it light fantasy? Up to you to decide. Is it on brand or not? If all of these core pillars are decided from the start and everybody's on board, then you should always go back to refer to it to make sure everything that you create afterwards follow that. When you're a UI UX person, you'd want to have a really good design system set in place. A design system is a collection of reusable components guided by clear standards that can be assembled together to build any number of applications. This is great. Like if you just Google the word design systems, there's going to be loads of tutorials on YouTube or on Google, especially from the tech industry. But basically, what you want in video games is like to create a design system that is easily updatable. How deep it is or how detailed it is completely up to you, because depending on your game, you might have 4 years to make it. Some games, you have literally 6 months. I don't know why you're doing that to yourself. Oh my God. Really, the UI will change a lot and you will iterate a lot. Like, never, a lot. So when you have a design system set in place, you can abstract from it a style guide. A design system is meant to be like a living document that you expect to slowly mold and change during the course of development, whereas a style guide acts a bit more of a snapshot of whatever people agreed the product should look at that point. If you want to learn more about the best way to document your work that is purposefully useful to other people on your team, I highly suggest watching this talk by Liz England on the GDC YouTube channel. You want documentation where people can act on them. So you, as the UI UX designer, will use these documents to make consistent design decisions. You might need a different document during handover to your engineers, which will cover more about behavior and different what-if states. Create documents based on who's using it. Once you're in a good place where you have all of your design building blocks ready, like pieces of Lego, and you're wireframing your screens, this is a really good place to go through the 10 design heuristics by Jacob Nielsen. Heuristic evaluation is a method for finding usability problems in your UI, thereby making them more available and solvable as part of the iterative design process. If your design passes all of these checks earlier in the process, then there's less chances of you fixing a design problem that's already implemented in engine. So in layman terms, you're preemptively making sure it's usable. that basically covers like the first half of the design process. Like in the second half, when you're involving a lot more people in it, you should have a good team system. So on a team system, you can try this method. This works well with smaller teams where people's roles are a little bit blurry. You can appoint specific owners, stakeholders, and gatekeepers for any given task or feature. Let's use an example. You need to create a level select screen. You, as the UI UX person, will be the owner because this is ultimately like a huge piece of UI, so you own this task and you see it from wireframing to designing to implementation. Stakeholders are everyone else involved in supporting you to get this task done, like a programmer. It's important to assign at least one person to this because this is really helpful if your team doesn't have a dedicated programmer, as you'll know you're working with who for which feature and when, and you might need another artist with you. So this could be a 3D artist, a concept artist, or a tech artist. This depends on how fancy your screen is, right? So only you know what you need for that screen. Do you need a 3D artist to supply you with a model? Do you need a concept artist to draw you some pretty things? Or do you need some shader support? And maybe also a third person could be a sound designer because they do the bleeps and the bloops. Lastly, and I would say quite important, this is very important, is the gatekeeper. This is a very important role because, especially if you're in a small team and it's like one of those
flat hierarchy teams.
Ultimately, when your design or implementation needs reviewing, this is the person who okays it. This can be anyone in a lead or director role, so a creative director, design director, basically whoever that is checking if what you have created satisfies the core pillars. Remember the thing from the start? Core pillars? Yep, that's how you make a cohesive game. So to go over it again, owners, you own that task, you own that piece of feature. Stakeholders, you are part of that feature. You are there to support the owner to make sure their vision comes to life. Gatekeepers, you are there to make sure that the owners are doing it right and we are all going into the same direction. When these roles are established, you are more likely to know your responsibilities and what you can or cannot do and what if you need more support. Yeah? Nice. Okay, so you've got your design system ready and your team's go-go. Time to make your video game. So much pain coming. Tips and tricks? Take what you need and keep the rest for later. Right, so I did the dirty work for you and crowdsourced some top UI tips and tricks from the internet. I mean, where else are you gonna get good advice, right? As usual, any advice on the internet, take it with a grain of salt. Like, take whatever that suits you, and maybe you can keep the rest for whenever you need it in the future project. I'm gonna be doing these in quickfire because there's a lot of them, and let's just go through them really quickly. If there's anything you want to screenshot, just do it. First category, production. Right, show and tell. Show your ideas and flows as early as possible with your stakeholders, even if it means crappy whiteboard drawings, because different roles have different mental models and they imagine things really differently until literally shown in front of them. So start showing things as soon as early. As soon as early. Sure. Speak to other disciplines. Learn to speak the language of every discipline on your small team. Your backend server might just be as good and insightful as game designers, and you learn a lot of things. Also, you don't need to learn how to code, but it's useful to know a little bit of how things work behind the scenes, so when you're setting up your screens, they are basically programmer friendly. Time estimates. Break down your task as much as you can and work with your producer to estimate the time needed for said feature. And then add more days. No more. Something will come up and like you're gonna get sick, or there's something that you didn't think of, or I don't know, something will always come up. Pad them days up. Fresh new screens will take longer as you're building everything from scratch, whereas later on, newer screens will take less time as you've already built up a library of UI assets ready to go. Design sprint before implementation sprint. Stagger the pipeline so that design is before implementation. These two cannot be in the same sprint together, else your programmer will be wasting time and they'll be rushing you and it's not great and everyone's like, where is it done? And you're just like, shut up! I'm sorry. bringing back a lot of memories. Don't break the build. It's a shared responsibility. Sometimes the coders and designers, they need to shove some early screens really quickly in there just to make sure it's functioning. And you come in a little bit later to reskin it to your shiny new design, but you still need a programmer to properly hook it up. In that in-between state of you checking in your changes and the coder picking it up, did you run it? Did you make sure it's not like breaking anything that's already in the game? Right, so to avoid this, if a screen already exists somewhere in the game and you're reskinning it, sometimes the safest way to do it is just to duplicate that screen, reskin that, and then pass it on to your coder so that when everyone else is working on the game, like the game is still functioning, nothing's breaking, and the coder can safely remove hookups from the old screen and then put it onto the new screen, all right? Can you guess I actually did this one time and it felt really bad. UI design. Name your files, your layers, have a clear folder structure. This is true for any discipline, but basically make it easier for someone else to find your shit. Like it's a collaboration, it's not just all you in here, it's all there in the screen. This is so important. You think this is like a given, but no, people forget this. Check your designs on device. If it's on mobile, send a screenshot to your phone. Can you tap the button with your sausage fingers? Can you read that 10-point font? Why is there a 10-point font in there? If you're on consoles, connect your PC to your living room TV and sit on your couch. Again, can you read it? It's easy to assume that it'll be fine, but looking at your computer screen is different from using your actual intended platforms, right? So, pro tip, if you use Figma or XD, they've got mirror apps that you can download on your phone, which mirror the design on your screen and on your phone. So you can live edit and you can actually see it moving on your screen as well. Depending on your resources, if you have a smaller phone to test your designs on, much better. Always, edge cases kind of thing. Design for the worst case scenario. Your strings will always end up longer. If you have like a list full of data, expect incomplete data. Like what happens when nothing's there? A user hits a certain error at some point in your flow. What happens then? This is basically like all of the worst what if. Think about it and try to cover all of that straight up. Find a font that localizes to as many languages as possible. This is how you keep it consistent without having to find so many like other fonts that almost matches your main one. Like, it's a little bit difficult, but just put in the effort to find those quickly, else you'll be paying so much for fonts. They're so expensive. Reusable and optimized assets. Yes, be smart with your assets. The more reusable they are, the better. This means you keep 9 slicing things, keep it small, power of 2, creating the assets white, and then using the tinting in engine. I reuse almost everything. Like, if you can reuse it, good. Another kind of obvious, but I still think needs to be said, take a break. You've been staring at your design for too long. Take a break and do a different task. Come back to this with a fresh pair of eyes, and you will just see everything that's off with it. Honestly, staring at something for a whole day, you're just going to be blind to certain things. Search. UX design. Don't reinvent the wheel. Use established video game literacy patterns when designing features in well-known genres. They already exist. Just use it. Gamers know them. Users know them. You know them. Like, it's fine. You don't have to be so unique and everything. Users expect feedback. The game should echo back what they are doing. So a simple example, navigating a set of buttons and you can't go further in a direction, maybe play a small sound effect or animation to indicate that you can't do it. It's good to communicate to the player what they can or cannot do. Players tend to like try everything and see what happens, right? So you want to give them good feedback and they know exactly where they are and where they want to go. User flow. Instead of designing a list of individual features, think about the global onboarding experience for the player and the flow in which all of those are introduced. Have a script for the game and invest more on the parts where the players spend a lot of time on. This is why FTUI, which is short for First Time User Experience, is really important. Not everybody's going to finish your game, but 100% of your players will go through the Fatui. So make sure you got that slick and smooth so that they keep coming back. Right, this next tip is actually one of my favorites, which is called secretly console first. When designing for a cross-platform, always think about it from a gamepad point of view because they have less input systems in here. If you can navigate an entire screen using just the gamepad and buttons, then it'll automatically work for a mouse and keyboard. There's a really cool write-up about this, which is going to be linked right here, or screenshot it and Google it. Prototype your shit early on Figma, XD, or Sketch. It doesn't need to be on everything. Probably you definitely need it for like the bigger screens. And having a playable wireframe really helps deciding on your interaction design and understanding your flow. Show it to a programmer. You need to know your technical limitations. There's no point getting really ham in like all the fancy things, and then programmers are like, nope, we can't do that. And you're just like, I spent a week on that. So show people things early. Chat to your narrative designer. Collab with them, again, as early as possible. Pointless for them to do any writing without seeing or feeling how the player will see it. They're also really good for ideas because they tend to think out of the box, and you'll be like, oh yeah, that's really cool, I should do that. Not everything can be fixed with UI. Sometimes less UI is the answer. If you think a feature is better suited elsewhere, make a case for it. Could a piece of text be replaced with like an in-world 3D asset instead? Or could you use VFX or animation feedback? Literally not everything needs to be band-aided with more UI. As much as I love my job, like sometimes less UI is good. Next up, user research and testing. Very easy. Observe people. Observing people interact with your product is disproportionately powerful. Push through the discomfort and user test your wireframes. Research objective will be to learn about errors, misunderstandings, goals, UX challenges. Not, do they think it's fun? That's a game designer question. Like, what is fun? Is like, but you, as a UX person, your job is to make sure it's usable and they understand what's happening. How are you going to do this? Get scrappy. Sometimes you don't really need a user research lab to get like really quick qualitative data. Like bare minimum is 5 people to play through your wireframe, and you'll spot the gaps in your design really quick. Do it using your wireframes, grab people from other parts of your company, or even just like your family, your friends, literally anybody who hasn't seen your designs yet. You will spot the really early on issues really quick. Saying that, once it's in a really good enough position where it's like, it's a bit more hefty, pay testers. Free food exposure, see your game first, blah, blah, blah. It's not going to attract your future everyday players to do your UI improvement studies. It's not going to reliably expose your UX issues either. For more user research stuff, you definitely want to follow player research and games user research, the special interest group. They've got a lot of resources for this kind of stuff. Next is accessibility. Microsoft Xbox Accessibility Guidelines version 2.0. It's a long one. Designing around these guidelines or similar from the very beginning of production will save a lot of very, very painful reworking later down the road. Look this up on the internet. They've updated it recently. It's a very good start for anything. Get a consultant. Remember that anyone can research, but the more important the question to the business, the more important it is to reduce risk by bringing in a professional. So you'd want to pay an accessibility consultant to make sure the game is accessible. This one is pretty easy. Not just color. Never rely on anything for just using just the color to convey important information. Use multiple routes of conveying said information. A lot of people are colorblind, and a lot of people just don't pay attention, so... Remapping key binding options. Players with accessibility issues will thank you, and you won't lose a ton of potential players who try your demo and find it unplayable because it's hard-coded to WASD and their keyboard has a completely different layout. Think global. Next up, UI text scaler. Let them make their UI text bigger. Nope, bigger than that. Bigger than that. Oh yeah. Cool, and the final category, localization. Use the W with method. Using the W's to gauge just how much space is available for your text, your localizer can use it as a guide when translating. Different languages have different letter counts, and not giving them any guidance will lead to a lot of wasted time of like trial and error. Like, does this fit? Does that fit? It's longer, shorter? Just go with this. Give extra space. Yes, we've mentioned it before. Strings will always end up longer than you expect. So you want to preemptive that with dynamic text, dynamic boxes, or just having loads of negative space. Double your negative space. Just double it. Translations are broken until confirmed not. There's the golden rule. If you cannot read a language, assume your current implementation of it is broken until someone who can read it tells you it's not broken. Yeah? Next one, hire professionals. Literally hire people whose literal job is to speak multiple languages and tell you just how bad your game is in their native language. And last and definitely not least, do not refer to languages with flags. Write the language's name out, preferably in its own script. They're languages, not countries. You're stepping into a lot of painful political stuff, and it's really unnecessary. Don't use flags or icons. Write the language name. Oh my gosh, cool. That was a lot, huh? We're almost done, just a bit. Friendship is magic, communities and resources. The best way to get better at your craft is to be able to talk to other people who do what you do. It's really important to be able to talk to someone with a shared design vocabulary like yours to bounce ideas and share knowledge. So, here are some communities and resources that could help you. First up, local UX meetups. They're usually smaller and you can get face time with some tech developers and people in the tech industry. My very first talk was in a small UX meetup. It was like 30 people in the room, and I learned a lot of how other industries work and fed that back into my game designs. So next is follow people on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter? Yeah. But really though, like a lot of really cool UI UX people are on Twitter, and they love to share the things that they know, the things that they do. It's Twitter though, but you know, sometimes it's alright. Next is find a mentor, locally or internationally. So a small plug, I actually run a mentorship program on the side. If there is such an initiative around your country or region, please, is the best thing in the world. This goes both ways, yeah. If you are someone who are already experienced, your knowledge and skills are a huge value to people just still learning. And if you're still learning, a mentor helps. But of course, sometimes it's difficult to meet people. I know COVID's still a thing. I'm indoors. You can join online communities. These are two of my favorite Discords. Number one is the We Can Fix It in UI Discord. This is by invite only, so you can get in touch with them and get an invite to join them. And this is a Discord for UI UX for game developers specifically all over the world. It's such a great resource. Everybody's constantly sharing things and asking questions, and you're constantly learning things. It's an amazing community. They also have the We Can Fix It in UI.com website, where a lot of the resources I'm going to show later on is in there. It's also a good start. The next Discord is Design Buddies. This is a more general UI UX design kind of Discord, so you get lots of people from non-game backgrounds. They're also super active. They do a lot of talks. They do a lot of Zoom meetups and things like that. Like it's really active, and people are very enthusiastic in there as well. Next, books. People ask me, what kind of books can you read? These are just the staples, like, go for it. The Design of Everyday Things, Don't Make Me Think, The Gamer's Brain, Games User Research, Inclusive Design for a Digital World, Pixel Perfect Precision, which is a PDF, but whatever, this is a book. Take a screenshot. Next up, video game references. So obviously, as UI UX designers, we have a job. We can't play every game in the world, but other people have. And thankfully, they record their gameplays. We have interface in-game, amazing resource for all the games. You can sort by genre, type, anything you can think of. And also game UI database. It's also up and coming and growing. Next is Can I Play That, which is specific to accessibility. Really good to see how other games do well or not in accessibility. And as a fallback, just search it on YouTube Let's Plays. Like, thank you, streamers. You've made a lot of game devs' lives both harder and easier. So next up, if you're feeling really good about yourself and you need to take yourself down a peg and just be really depressed, let's go on some design portfolio websites. Dribble, Behance, Carbon Made, ArtStation. I don't know how I'm still employed. Look at all these people who are so much better than me. Free stuff. Icons, non-project, flat icon. You don't need to create every single little thing yourself. Sometimes it's good to have a start. These are great resources. Next up, photography, Unsplash, Pexels. High quality, good vibes. And also, once you've done really good designs, slap that shit on something. Mockupworld.co, Anthony Boyd mockups. You want to see it on a phone but look pretty, but not your actual phone, because you know you're not a hand model. Well, I can be. Anyway, mockups, great, especially for interviews. Like if you have to do an art test, you put it on a mockup. Nice. Next is YouTube tutorials. Some of these you might already know, but my favorites, GMTK, Game Dev Guide, Extra Credits. They're more generic stuff about game development, but their UI topics are really spot on. I love them. Next, for design related stuff, the Figma system designs tutorial has been a godsend for me. Like I learned so much from just following this through. Just try it at least once. There's like, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours worth. And the Future YouTube channel talks a lot about design and career in design. Also really good resource. Next is conferences. So I know we can't really go to any this year, but the 3 that you want to keep an eye on is the Games UX Summit, the GA Conference for Accessibility, and GUR Conference for User Research. Yep, so if you search for any of these 3 online, they will have previous talks uploaded on YouTube, and those are really good deep dives on specific titles and specific things. Highly suggest looking them up. And finally, my favorite part, talking about tools. There's so many like so-and-so versus so-and-so versus so-and-so, like, you know, articles online, like which one should you use? Okay, so let's talk about them really quickly. Figma, Sketch, Adobe XD. If you're asking me which one is the best, doesn't matter. Like just use one of them, practice. So Sketch is the standard in the tech industry, but it's paid and Mac only. So a little bit of a barrier there. Adobe XD comes bundled in with Adobe CC. So if you already have that, that's great. But also, it's kind of costly. And if you don't already subscribe to the entire package, it's an extra cost on you. Figma is browser-based and works both on PC and Mac. And most importantly, it's free. Functionally, I think they're all great, but to me, Figma is by far the most accessible, especially if you're new to the field and you want to practice. Like, literally just go for Figma. Whoa, boy! Oh my god, that was really long. Are you tired? I'm tired. Thanks for listening. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at Studio Anissa, where I usually talk about how tired I am and I want a nap. But every so often I talk about UI, or, you know, I have a hot take on whatever the games industry is angry about this week. There's always something. I'd also like to thank the British Council Play UK for inviting me to speak today. They have been an incredible team to work with. It's always an honor for me to be able to talk about UI. And good luck with your design journey. And remember, UI only works when you and I are together.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.